cops of Reddit, what has so far been the creepiest call you've ever had to respond to and what happened? From my post 8 months ago. Got a call for a missing child. Got to the home to find the mother highly distressed and not sure what to do. I called in everyone to first search the home and property. I decided to search the backyard since it was a large wooded lot with no visible fence. After about 10 minutes I found the boy. He was caught on an old chain link fence in the woods that was blocked by a bunch of trees, so you couldn't see it from the house. He had basically gotten strangled to death on the fence. He must have been climbing on it, fell, and got his hooded sweatshirt caught on it. The worst part for me was having to call it in on the radio, knowing the mother might hear it inside from one of the other officers' radio. The worst part for me was having to call it in on the radio, knowing the mother might hear it inside from one of the other officers' radio. I was in search and rescue, and we had the same sort of issue. There is often family around the search site. We had a policy that you say you found a red shoe, which meant that we were to switch to an alternative channel, which we were not licensed for, so that the news could not listen in, and the co's were supposed to move away from any family members. Maybe worth setting up something similar in your area. Working third shift on Halloween night, I'm out by one of our smaller lakes just outside the city limits. Kids love to go out and drink, which is surrounded by some very nice houses. Going through the neighborhood, each of the roads ends at a small 2-lane road that surrounds the lake. I'm slowing to the stop sign and already starting to look to my right to make the turn when my headlights start tracing the rock wall that surrounds the lake. I catch something out of the corner of my eye in one of the large trees that dots the walk path. I back up to see what it was, and I see a guy hanging. At first I thought it was a Halloween decoration. The neighborhood is really into decorating for every holiday, so I stop, get out, and as soon as my flashlight hits him I realize, nope, no decoration, he dead. As I'm standing there getting ready to call it in, I notice a gaggle of kids coming down the street trick-or-treating. As soon as they see my car they start heading my way faster, so I book it back up the block to meet the parent walking with them and tell her she needs to take the long way around the block the other way. She can see it on my face, I'm not kidding. Turns out he was a 20-year-old that was devastated about his girlfriend breaking up with him, and she lived in the last house on that block, where she would see him the next morning when she looked out her window. We responded to a burglary alarm at a mortuary and found that one of the rear doors was left open. Policy now dictates that the entire building needs to be cleared, searched, to confirm that it was a false alarm, which most are. It's the middle of the night and totally dark. We use flashlights and never turn on lights. We walk into one of the rooms and see a body on a table. It appeared that it was waiting to be processed, possibly embalmed, by the mortician. It smelled like a mildly decomposing body. Suddenly I see a shadow to my right and I shine my light there and find nothing out of the ordinary. I immediately smell a really strong whiff of perfume blow by me. The search was completed more expeditiously than normal after that. Nothing was found. It was a stormy night on the Oregon coast. A lady was driving drunk and ran into the back of a parked school bus. When she did, her car caught on fire, but she was able to escape. When I found her slowly walking down a side street, I was telling her to stop and turn around. When she turned around, her lower jaw was gone, and she was totally dazed. Her tongue was sticking straight out the top of her neck, and she was trying to talk. She ended up surviving, but needed tons of plastic surgery. My uncle was a sergeant, and had to be called several times out to a house for domestic abuse. This older guy had some young 18-year-old he would pay for the guy to swallow certain objects like paper clips and human hair. The kid would poop it out into a bag and the older guy would sift through the fesses like a goddamn treasure hunt for the items. He would then put them in an envelope and file them. Edit: the domestic abuse had nothing to do with the poo treasure hunt. I don't think it's illegal, just super creepy. Reminds me of a story I heard at work, which I guess I'll share, even though I'm not a cop. I build websites for a living, and one of our customers runs this high-class escort service. At one point one of his girls was invited to come to this rich middle-aged guy's chateau somewhere in Belgium. She got paid up front to spend the entire night with him, and we're talking $400 an hour here, plus expenses. You'd think the guy had some epic ex planned considering what he paid, but no. He gave her a large bottle of water and instructed her to pee in any corner of the chateau she liked. He then spent the entire morning sniffing around, trying to find where she had peed. By the time she left, that was literally all he had gotten for his thousands of dollars. I responded to a report of an unresponsive infant. When I arrived, all the family members were standing around casually in the front yard pointing into the house. I found the baby in the back room laying on her back on a bare mattress. I started CPR, but realized the baby was probably already deceased. We rushed her out to the arriving ambulance hoping they had a way to bring her back. I learned she was the mother's second suspicious SIDS death, and I had her other children removed from her care. The difficult part was when I left the scene and went to the ER to see what came of the situation. As I walked in and asked where she was, a nurse walked over to me and handed me the deceased baby swaddled in a blanket and told me to wait for someone to show me to the morgue. So I'm standing there in the ER in uniform holding what everyone thinks is a live infant, but rather an infant corpse, and several people stop by wanting to see her and commenting on how cute it is to see an officer holding a baby. I just smiled, but it killed me inside. I was ushered back to the morgue after what felt like an eternity and told I had to wait with the baby until the medical examiner arrived. They took the blankets off and laid her on a stainless steel gurney and left me alone with her again. I lounged around the morgue for about an hour waiting. By the time I got home several hours after the end of my shift, because this call came out 15 minutes before the end of my 10-hour shift, I laid down on my bed and cried for a long time. My young daughter was in daycare and my wife at work. I really needed to hold both of them, so the house felt incredibly empty. My daughter was only slightly older than the infant, and when I was looking at her earlier, I kept seeing my own daughter. I didn't get any sleep at all before going back in for the next shift later that night. Got a call that someone wasn't answering their phone or the doorbell. We got to the house and noticed that every window was blinded by either curtains or pieces of paper. We rang the doorbell and yelled through the litter box, but there was no answer. We opened the door and got inside. In the house it looked like someone just had lunch. There was bread on the table and juice or milk in the glasses. Children's toys scattered all around. Then I saw a note that gave me the chills. It was a suicide note. As the door was locked from the inside, the person had to be in the house. We checked room by room and my heartbeat was at 300% when I checked the bathroom. Preparing myself for slit wrists or throats, I opened the door slowly, but there was nothing. Finally one more room left, which was the attic. We walked slowly up the stairs and we found the resident there, hanging from a beam. I will never forget the adrenaline I had, the scene in the living room or the resident I found. I was a resident director at a student dorm, and we'd get calls from helicopter moms that hadn't heard from their child in 3 days, so I'd occasionally have to do wellness checks. I was never really concerned, because kids are too busy getting stoned, shagging, studying, and drinking to call mom every night. But I had one call that I was prepared to see something ugly. It was for a resident I knew pretty well who was always a bit down, who didn't really have any friends and gave off a weird vibe, but I knew she was close to her parents and walked around calling them a lot. Keying into her room, I was ready to see her in the tub or with a belt around her neck or a spilled pill bottle somewhere. Nope. She was shacked in with a new duck buddy, and they'd turned the dorm into one large fort complete with rooms and video game lounge, and had been too busy shagging and smoking dope to remember to call mom. She hadn't heard me knocking over their noise making, and both were quite upset I'd barged in. That was a good day. My father-in-law is sitting beside me, so I asked him. He is a retired sheriff and was a deputy before that. He was the first responder to an accident. A truckload of farm workers were coming back from the fields. The truck went over a hump in an intersection and a little girl in the back of the truck flew out and landed headfirst on the pavement. My Phil held her as she moaned and eventually died in his arms. He says he still hears her sounds in his head all these years later. My cousin is a cop and he responded to a call on Valentine's Day night. A 12-year-old girl called in to say her mother had blown her brains out in the living room. I guess her and her brother were getting ready for dinner and the mom just shot herself. He said the creepy thing about it was dinner all set up, drinks on the table, and suddenly she shot herself. Kids were sitting outside when he arrived. To this day I can't imagine Valentine's Day for them. But I know that is something that stuck with him, seeing that. An overlooked sign of abuse, I feel, is when a kid is way too mature and cool-headed for their age. That 12-year-old knew exactly what to do and how to protect her brother from the sight, which means she either had to do so before or was mentally prepared for the possibility. Ducking subscribe to Reddit throne. Ducking subscribe to Reddit throne.